You really do. I cannot believe that we started that and you in the middle of it go, oh, shit.
Well,
you know.
I don't know if it got recorded or not, but you've told them now anyway.
I have told them now. Welcome to Untold Radio. This is Down South Anomalies. My name's Jay Katz. I'm here with my beautiful, extraordinary, technically out of control wife, Aspasia. And we have an astounding guest.
Yes, we do.
A gentleman that has lived the timeline with us as researchers.
Yep.
Yet this is the first time we're actually speaking.
Yes.
It's not that we haven't been on speaking terms.
No, it's just that we haven't.
What Asper, I would call this man.
Yes.
From what I've sort of know now of him, one of the most egalitarian researchers this country has ever seen.
We can do with more of those.
Because his motivation to write this astounding book, not on radar, about the Frederick Valentich
Nothing
story.
on radar.
Nothing on radar. Thank you for correcting me.
I'm going to bring it straight up now.
Yeah, bring it up now.
Yeah.
Is basically motivated. After all these years, nearly 45 years, it is motivated by his heart to correct all the abuse and garbage, corruption, ridicule that has gone out there and been thrown at this pilot over this astounding story. And there are very few people I ever find that are motivated for the right reasons. And George Simpson is one of them. So welcome indeed, George. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on our Untold Radio Down South Anomalies. And sorry about our rickety start.
Yeah. Well, I didn't hear anybody swear, so it's all cool. Well,
there you go. I gave it away. I threw the cat out of the bag there.
So there you go.
Where do we really start? Well, I think what I want to say is you were born the same year I was. The same year that Frederick Valentich was born, 1958. And we were children that primarily were infected with the space race. It was there. They were pushing so much propaganda at us. But one of the astounding commonalities that I've learned from watching many other podcasts with you is that you're a lover of the profound Leslie Stevens and Joseph Stefano's Outer Limits.
Yes, absolutely.
And you know, did you know that Leslie Stevens, the original producer, and then he brought in Stefano, his father was Admiral Stevens that gave us the massive false flag event that dragged us all into the Second World War, well, primarily America, in the Bay of Tonkin.
No, I didn't know that.
Yep.
And his name does come up. And here's another little scene. I'm just going to throw at you quickly. This is an image from an episode. Did you catch this episode when you were younger?
I did see that one, and I didn't understand it. And when I watch it nowadays, I still can't understand it, really. That's
the Bolero Shield.
Oh, the Bolero Shield.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one. He comes down in a beam of light.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. Now, this episode went to air, evidently, the night of the Betty and Barney Hill abduction.
Right.
And it's always been stated.
So you're telling me Betty and Barney Hill missed this one? This episode?
No, well, evidently they were supposed to have seen this whilst they were in the car driving and being abducted. Huh? And this is
is that where they got all the...
This is how absurd debunking is.
Yes.
But, you know, that's just a little bit of commonality we have together. The other thing is we were both very touched by similar literature. And one of those was Richard Tamling's book, which you've spoken about.
The one in the middle. Yep.
Yes. Well, there's two versions there. And this astounding book from 1980, The Devil's Meridian.
Yep.
So I just wanted to show that extraordinary commonality that we brought up in this country, and we've got that similar thing. And I love that. I thought our cat was going to be making sounds with his Alzheimer's, but your budgies started to get overexcited there.
It's a menagerie around here, isn't it?
That's a chicken.
Yeah, at the back door. It wants to come in.
That is fabulous.
Do they come in?
It wants a cuddle.
Are they allowed in?
Oh, it comes in every now and then, but
all right, okay. But you cuddle
the budgie's going to the vet right now. The budgie's in the car right now, going to the vet.
All right. Well, let me start in the voice of Robert Stack, and then I'll get you to pick up where I leave off. So it's October 21, 1978. It's 6:19 p.m. The continent of Australia. a single-engine Cessna 182 lifted off from Moorabbin Airport just south of Melbourne. The pilot was 20-year-old Frederick Valentich. Valentich had been flying for 2 years, accumulating more than 150 hours of solo time. He had dreams of one day becoming a commercial pilot.
Yep.
So tell us, lead us, and I know, like every rock star, you must be absolutely at the end of your tether, recanting this story word for word over and over again as the decades roll by. But can you lead us into what happened to Frederick then, and where was he headed?
Okay. Well, a lot of people would have heard the story because it did get in the news and it went all around the world.
It was a major news event, and it was probably cited as one of the greatest Australian aviation mysteries in history. Still is.
That is quite a mystery. Yeah, that's a touched-up photo that's been coloured in by a friend of mine, actually. Anthony Hadgen recoloured that. It was a black and white photo.
He's done a beautiful job.
He's done a great job. Yeah. It's it's in my mind all the time. It's hard to work out where to begin, really. But look, Fred, I'd like to first of all say he was a 20-year-old. He's basically a kid, a 20-year-old person who rented the plane and wanted to become a commercial pilot. His father took him for a joy flight when he was a teenager, and he enjoyed it so much he decided he wanted to be a pilot and work flying planes for the rest of his life. He wanted to be a pilot from then on. And so, of course, he had to have flying lessons, and they're expensive. So he started working in the local hardware store to earn money to pay for his flying lessons. I think his father helped him with his flying lessons as well, a little bit. He started off, he joined the cadets, the Australian Air Force cadets, and that way you get on the program there and they teach you how to fly. And they were quite impressed with Fred and his common sense approach. In fact, to quote one of the trainers down there, they thought he was clever enough and level-headed enough he would have made a good flight instructor.
Right.
That's what they thought he'd be able to do. But academically, he didn't quite get to pass the exams to get into the Air Force. But while he was in the cadets, he made a very good impression on people. One of the other guys in his crew said that he was common sense on legs. So that's pretty interesting. The day that he went to King Island, there's been a lot of speculation about why he flew down there on his own. Well, he wasn't going to fly by himself. He was going to have his girlfriend with him. And she had flown with him on many occasions, but she had to work that day, and a number of circumstances got in the way that prevented her from actually being able to meet up with him in time before he had to leave. And he ended up waiting a bit longer for her, but he waited as long as he could. She didn't show up, and so he had to go. Now, they lived a fair way from Moorabbin Airport because they were he was in Keilor East. Right. So, and she was from that side of town too. So it's what, maybe an hour's drive or 3/4 of an hour's drive or more to get to Moorabbin from there. But anyway, she didn't quite make it. So he took off and he was going down to King Island. Now, for what reason? Well, the main reason, that's a great little map to have. Yes. And it's accurate because it's showing the line going straight across Port Phillip Bay.
Right.
Which means when there's a British documentary that was made about this that showed him taking off in the correct direction as well on the airport. He headed off away from the bay, like north, in a north direction from Moorabbin Airport, and then turned around, and that brought him straight over my parents' house where I lived at the time, because I saw the plane go over the afternoon that he went over when he was heading for King Island. I watched a plane go past. It was a blue and white Cessna. And I had this strange thought popped into my mind. And I talk about this in the book. The thought was, don't take your eyes off that plane. Now, where we lived, there were lots of planes flying around all the time. We weren't that far from Moorabbin Airport, like 3 or 4 minutes by air from Moorabbin Airport. Now, that photo you've got right now has only come along. We've only found that in the last few months. It didn't even get into the book because it came along after the book was published in August. So it's since August that's turned up. That came through Steve Roby. Somebody sent him that photo. A fellow called Paul Spotswood sent it to him. Paul used to fly DSJ when it was brand new, and this photo was taken when the plane was brand new.
Wow.
It's the only one of the few full color photos that have ever been seen.
It's a beautiful looking plane.
It was brand new in 1968. You can see it's got a light blue color from the rear window to the tail. It's a light blue, and it's on the top of the wheel trims as well, that light blue.
Gorgeous.
But on the sides, I thought it was a dark blue, but it's not. It's black on the sides. Those stripes on the back, on the side, are black,
right,
with gold pinstriping. So that's a detail that I only just was able to work out this year.
Isn't that astounding? Well, thank you for being able to let us have a look at this photo.
That photo, was taken by a fellow named Cam Kerr. And he was one of the first people to fly the plane. He didn't own it, but he had the job of flying it around. That photo was taken at an airport, not Moorabbin Airport, another one. Can't think of it right now offhand. It's just down in one of those. It's right near the edge of the sea when you head down to King Island, down to Phillip Island. It'll come to me anyway. It's not a very important detail. The important detail is that Fred was flying alone. I have a friend who's a pilot and who has been a hangar manager at Moorabbin Airport for many years. He said that it's not something that you do if you're flying alone in a single engine plane. You don't normally fly over the ocean in the evening or at night time if you've never done it before at night. You don't do it alone, and you don't do it in a single engine plane. Normally, it's just not done.
So by this time, how long had Frederick been flying on his own?
Well, he'd been flying for a couple of years, and he was able to fly alone. And he had an instrument rating, a Class 4 instrument rating, so he could fly by instruments if he needed to.
And this really wasn't night, was it? It was twilight. There was still a lot of light around.
That's right. He had planned to go down there late in the afternoon and get back not long after he'd actually left, because he was going to go earlier, but he was waiting for Rhonda to turn up, and Rhonda didn't quite get there on time. So he had to go. He was running out of time because there was a party, an officers' party was going to be held, and he wanted to go down, pick up some crayfish and come back. That was the story we were told. And the thing was, the owners of the aircraft that rented the planes did not like people going down to King Island, picking up seafood and bringing it back on the planes, because the plane ended up smelling like a fish shop. You know?
You're right.
So he had an esky in the back to put the crayfish in, and he had 4 life jackets. That was to cover the esky.
Right,
he wasn't picking up any people down there. There wasn't any arrangement to meet anyone and pick them up down there. There was just to hide the esky. That's what I think, anyway, from what I've been able to work out, and from talking to the family and other people at the airport. The plane was serviced that morning by Mike Hodges, an aircraft mechanic who worked at Moorabbin, had serviced the plane that morning. He said it was ready to go for another 100 hours of flight time.
Wow.
Because they'd serviced the plane, and there was nothing wrong with the plane. You know, the plane was shipshape, a good, tidy little aircraft. My sister Lois has flown in that actual aircraft 2 years before it disappeared.
That's astounding. I believe she was carrying a piece of your equipment too, a piece of photographic equipment of yours.
My camera, yeah. The 35mm camera that I had, she borrowed it.
What is happening with the synchronicity of this event and your personal life? I mean, to be standing there and witness that plane on that day, to have this really strong intuitive feeling that you need to keep watching it. And just for people listening and watching, you did watch it till it was obliterated. It was out of your sight range. It went behind a tree or something. Is that right?
The Royal Melbourne Golf Course was at the end of our street. They had a lot of tall pine trees. and it was just heading toward the horizon, so it just went out of view.
Right.
Toward the setting sun.
Was there any feeling after that when you lost vision of it that you should have actually got in the car and started chasing this thing, or
no, it was just that. No, I was then wondering when my girlfriend was going to turn up because she was coming to visit. But the thing was, I can't remember if she actually turned up.
I mean, you and Frederick were both waiting for girls that day.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's funny.
Wow.
Oh, you want to hear something really strange? The guy who owned the aircraft at that stage when it disappeared was a guy called Dr. Day, Dr. Cephas Day, and he had his practice in Reserve Road, Balmoral. So he was a local Balmoral doctor. I lived in Balmoral, and Dr. Day was in Balmoral. He owned the plane, and this girlfriend of mine that I was waiting to come, her surname was the same. It was Day. I don't think they were related, but it's just another weird synchronicity. Her surname was Day.
I think you were meant to be the bearer of this story into the future years. It was like everything had clicked together.
I'll tell you something else, though. One of my neighbours, a guy called Bob, lived a few doors down from me. He was probably 8 or 9 years older than me. He's still around. I saw him a few weeks ago. He was a uni student back then, and his mother had remarried and moved out of the house. And all these siblings had moved out. So he had this big house to himself. So all of his uni student friends got free rent. They all moved in to his place, and they had parties every weekend. And there was a lot of drinking, loud music. It was great. It was like a party every weekend. And the front yard was full of motorbikes. I was a bit of a motorcycle enthusiast in those days. And I went over and took photographs. They had Ducatis and Nortons and Honda 4s, and all the big motorbikes were there. And one of them was a Norton Commando, Norton 850 Commando. And that belonged to a good friend of Bob's, a bloke called Lionel. Right? Lionel's dad was Dr. Day, who owned the plane that disappeared.
Gee whiz.
And I only found that out 1 year ago. 1 year ago. And I've still got the photos I took of the Norton Commando in Bob's front yard.
And that's one of my favorite songs by the Canadian independent band Men I Trust, Norton Commando. So you should have a listen to that, Men I Trust.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, you will love it. It's a beautiful song. Isn't that odd? Can we digress back to where we were going with this story? It's the synchronicity is just astounding.
It is crazy. And I've only found this out in recent years too, all of this stuff. Anyway, so look, Fred wants to become a commercial pilot. He would have become the youngest commercial pilot in Australian history. And he's heading down, he's going down to Cape Otway, where he's going to turn and then head down to King Island. Now, I don't think we had a 40th anniversary sort of meeting about this with a whole lot of people, and we were invited, and we held it at Moorabbin Airport. The local group called Victorian UFO Action organised it for the 40th anniversary of his disappearance. So it's about 4 years ago this happened, 4 to 5 years ago. And we determined from that Fred didn't actually, in his flight plan, he didn't actually log in that he was going to stop at King Island. He wasn't necessarily going to land even. He only had to go down and do a U-turn and come back. He was logging up flight hours because you need a certain number of flight hours, if you're going to get to the next level in your career as a pilot. You've got to have so many hours of flight time. So it's not even, a lot of people say, oh, look, it was a shoddy event. He didn't plan it properly. He didn't even plan to have the lights turned on down at King Island. Yeah, well, when he'd left, he thought Rhonda was going to turn up sooner. He was delayed, and he had no intention of flying at night time over water. He was going down there in the daytime, and he was going to land there, either pick up some crayfish or something, or no, I don't know. That must have been prearranged because Brian Jones was the guy who worked down at King Island on the runway. He had the job of turning the lights on and beginning the search for Fred when Fred didn't turn up, Brian Jones. And he said that he thought Fred might have been suicidal or something and might have decided to go out with a big bang kind of thing, which doesn't add up.
Especially when you're in love and you've got so much to look forward to.
Yeah. So, but that was one of Brian's theories. He spoke to me about that on the documentary that we did in 2013. We were talking about that on the beach down at Anglesey, and it was raining as we were walking along the beach. It was miserable. But anyway, he wasn't suicidal. But Fred was going down there. He didn't get them to turn the lights on because he hadn't planned to be. He would have been back here before dark had he left at the time he thought he was going to leave. So
it was probably just flight hours, as you're saying. The fish might not have come into it at all. And I believe he was in constant communication, and there was nothing he was doing wrong. This is the demonization of someone so innocent, caught in a perfect storm where circumstances alter things, and people just, they cannot explain it. So what they do is they victimize, they character assassinate.
Things too.
They do.
It really angers me.
The things I read on websites and things on these forums where they talk about it, the things they say about Fred they're just terrible. They say the most revolting things about it.
But most of them probably never even met the guy.
Or did any research on the case.
Never spoke to the guy. They're just pulling things out of the air.
Yeah. They don't know anything about it. They don't know what they're talking about.
Why would you even speculate on something you don't know?
There's so much of it that motivated me to get writing to defend, to jump to Fred's defense. I don't see many people, defending Fred at all. And Steve Roby's the only person I've seen that said anything positive about Fred, because he was the last man to speak to Fred.
He was the air traffic controller.
One of the
and he comes across as a very honest, genuine human being that's just relating what he was experiencing on that day. He, at the end of the day, I mean, it comes down to speculation and assumption, but when there's no other options, you have to say this is a truly anomalous event. And no matter, and you can't get a better witness than an air traffic controller.
Well, and particularly that one, because Steve, so experienced. He's been an air traffic controller. He's been a flight instructor, right? Even an aerobatics instructor. Anything aviation, he knows what's going on. He was probably the most qualified person for Fred to be talking to. And the things that Fred was trying to find out, what could this thing be? And all that was recurring to Fred was, it's going so fast, it must be some kind of military aircraft. And on 3 occasions he asked, are there any military aircraft? Is there any such a type of military aircraft that can do what I'm seeing? And the answer came back, no, there's nothing out there. There's nothing showing on the radar. You're by yourself out there. We don't know what you're talking about, sort of thing.
I mean, what extraordinary evidence that transcript is in itself. And I know that it still remains, in a sense, classified out there. And I understand what you were telling me the other day about, this being a shocking thing for the family to keep reliving. But that transcript in itself, from a pilot's perspective, he was doing nothing wrong whatsoever. He was reporting what he was seeing.
Yeah. Absolutely. He was doing everything by the book, in fact. Just before he reached Cape Otway, he was contacted by Steve to ask him. Steve realised he must have left late because Fred was running out of time to reach Cape Otway, or to reach King Island on time before search and rescue was going to get called out. Wow. They have these things called SAR time, search and rescue time. When you go anywhere and you're putting in a flight plan, you give them an estimated time of arrival. And if you're not there within half an hour of that time, search and rescue can start, you see. Well, Fred hadn't quite reached Cape Otway yet. And Steve got onto him and said, do you want to change your SAR time? He said, what time you've got, you're not going to get there in time. We need to make an adjustment to this. And Fred agreed straight away. And so they both agreed on a new arrival time, which was, say, if Fred didn't get to King Island by 8 p.m., there'd be a search.
Right.
Would have started. Fred was planning to be back in Melbourne by 8 p.m. if he could. But it was before 7 p.m. that time was adjusted. And then, so when that was done, once Fred got to King Island, to Cape Otway, and you could see the lighthouse, and that's where you turn left, do a left turn and turn south. From there, it's about a 25-minute flight to King Island from Cape Otway.
Right.
And he reached just around 7 p.m. He was there at Cape Otway, around 7 p.m. And then he flew for 6 minutes without talking to anybody. He was just flying down to King Island. And in that 6 minutes, he got about a third of the way to King Island in about 6 minutes. And during that time, there was a lot of other people in the air that were communicating with Steve Roby. And they've all got normal sounding communications. There's no unusual static interference coming across the radios or anything. It's all clear communications. The funny thing is one of them's got such a strong Scottish accent, I can't make out a word of what this pilot's saying. And it's a miracle to me that Steve gives him an intelligent answer, because I can't make out a word.
Right.
What he says. So Steve had a he must have been very experienced talking to Scottish pilots. I don't know. Anyway, after about 6 minutes, Fred comes on the radio and says, Melbourne, this is DSJ. When he was at Cape Otway, Fred had radioed in and said, I'm at that point now. This is the point where they turn. He said, I'm now at Cape Otway, proceeding to King Island. And that was acknowledged. Yep, okay. Delta Sierra Juliet. Yep, that's okay. So then there was the 6 minutes of all the other radio transmissions that went on. And then something strange started happening about 6 minutes into the flight from Cape Otway. And that's when Fred said, he asked the question, is there any known aircraft below 5,000? And you got a pretty quick return answer, which was no known aircraft in your area. There's no aircraft below 5,000. Now I've printed the script, the actual transcript, as Appendix 2 in the book.
Great. Great.
Yep.
And I've actually, on a couple of occasions, I've been able to hear the tape, and I've been able to make a few corrections on here, because there were a few things that were wrong right at the very beginning. Fred says, just after being told there's no known traffic, Fred said, I have seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000. He said that. It makes sense. In the transcript, they misread what he said. He wasn't speaking very clearly at that point, but it's clear to me that he said, I have seems to be large aircraft. They wrote, I am seems to be a large aircraft. It doesn't make any sense.
No,
not at all.
It's just a little error that was made. I've tried to make this a more accurate transcript in the book. I've titled it "Accurate Transcript."
Good on you.
And thanks to Dr. Richard Haynes, when he gave a talk about this, he pointed out that there's a part in the transcript where Fred says, "It appears to be stationary. What I'm doing is orbiting, and this thing is orbiting on top of me also." And Haynes said, that's not what I've heard on the tape. Yeah, that's Dr. Haynes there. He said, Dr. Haynes said to him, said that in his talk, I'm going to get into hot water over this one. But it seems to me, he says, Fred said, it seems to be chasing me. What I'm doing is orbiting, and the thing is orbiting on top of me also. This thing was following or chasing him. That's what Fred said. So that's in the transcript in my book too.
I'll tell you what, Richard Haynes would be well aware, because he primarily, as you and I know, documented airline pilot reports as the most effective eyewitnesses you could ever have. And
exactly.
there is consistent narratives in those reports about objects doing exactly the same thing that Frederick was
experiencing.
Yeah. And that is that they seem to play cat and mouse.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. He was involved in communications in the Apollo project. Dr. Haynes was part of one of those communications scientists. They had to work out if there was any known way of keeping in contact with the astronauts when they're in orbit around the moon, and to go behind the moon, you'd lose contact because the moon's a solid object and it blocks out your radio signals.
Mm.
And that's a problem they never solved. They always went out of contact when they were in orbit.
And we saw that recently with Artemis going around the moon as well. That there was the same thing, but we won't go there. But you know, I'm a bit upset with Richard in terms of what I've learnt from your research is the fact that he sort of let the side down in that book he released years later. You know, and there it is.
Yeah, that one. Yes. Melbourne episode. Yeah. Well, that everybody was excited about that. That finally is a book about the Valentich case. And this came out about 20 years after Fred disappeared, something like that, or just under 20 years. He was talking about it when he was here. That was 20 years after Fred disappeared. So I'm not sure what date he released. That was 90. Oh, no, would have been in the early 80s, I guess, or the mid 80s.
20 years after that would have been.
I don't know.
78,
See,
88,
78.
98. About 98. 78. It was 98. It was 20 years after.
When he came here, it was 20 years after Fred disappeared. But that book was already had
been published.
Only a year or two before it came out. Only a few years anyway. It's hard to remember. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, anyway. Look, you're doing a great job, and I think it's actually, you know, I've always admired Richard Haynes because I think the one way to actually push the skepticism aside is that, you know, utilize this highly trained. I mean, look at what we're looking at today, George. We're looking at super F-18 Hornet pilots, utilizing the most advanced infrared imagery, the FLIR systems. There is no way that you can get a better eyewitness.
Well, if they're not a credible observer, I don't know who is.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I mean, don't tell me, you know, those Top Guns are out there on psilocybin hallucinating these events, and that's all part of the happy way of the US Air Force. I doubt it very much.
Well, that's what the skeptics would like you to think.
Oh, well.
They're already having a go at it, saying these guys don't know what they're talking about. They're already trying to
according to them, nobody knows what they're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is no one single person that is...
But what they don't take into reality...
able to actually make a report without being poo-pooed by people who weren't even there, who didn't witness the event, who have no clue about what these people are talking about, and they're going to tell everybody what these people experienced. It's like, that doesn't
the most
make
tragic
any sense.
thing is the human impact. And on that family that were a loving, caring family, the anguish that father went through every year. He evidently kept every single artifact from his son. And he would go to Cape Otway on the anniversary of that disappearance every year till he died. The human impact is astounding. And people should really take care in their words and their research with dealing with this stuff. And you know what it's left up to is one sole individual like yourself spending their own money over the course of many, many decades. Sorry about this, George, but over the course of your entire life, literally, you know.
Most of his life, most of his adult life.
Having an extraordinary heart and depth of empathy to keep carrying on this research. I mean, people would state this is a really old case. It's irrelevant. This case has never been closed. This is an open case in terms of like someone died. Someone disappeared.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how did you know, this is one of the questions that nobody really asks. Did the owners of the plane get their insurance money? No, that's you know.
That's interesting.
It's interesting because how do they go about it? Do they say it crashed? What's the official verdict?
Was it an act of God? And is God an extraterrestrial?
People can actually, you know, claim their insurance because they would have had the plane insured and it's lost now. They don't have it anymore. So what would be the official finding so these people can claim their insurance?
Well, the owner of the plane was a doctor practicing an MP, a GP who worked in the Balmoral area, an intelligent guy, and he rented the plane out to Victorian Air Services, Victoria, I think. No, sorry, not them. They were the communication guys. One of the companies down in Moorabbin, you could hire a plane and go flying. There's always a few planes available for hire. Company, there was one that I used to I went on a joy flight down there with Shutt Aircraft. Arthur Shutt used to run such an organisation where you have planes available and you get a pilot and you can take people for joy flights, which is what Fred did. So, of course, the planes were they were serviced regularly and they were insured, of course. Now they did get their payout for the plane it would have been a few years later, but obviously nothing was ever found. So it would have been a bit difficult, I think, to prove to the to an insurance company that your plane has disappeared. Yeah, it was unusual, but the insurance people would have known about it. But Dr. Day was a well-known local general practitioner, and from the people that have communicated with me about him, he was an unusual guy. He used to smoke while consulting with patients. He would smoke in the consulting rooms.
It was a different time.
It was
a different time. I can remember going to my doctor, who was my family doctor, and he was smoking a cigar whilst telling me, well, you've got to decide whether you want to smoke or you've got asthma. One of the two.
Yeah, right.
You choose which one you want. So it was a different time. Very pragmatic people were in that time.
Very
and tenacious.
Stupid people.
Yeah. Wow. No, just realistic people. I think in a lot of way, far more honest people. You know, they were just practical and they dealt with things.
Yeah.
Gee whiz. I mean, sorry, we've actually digressed all over the shop there. We've thrown you for a tailspin.
Well, that is a question that's,
it's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question because I always think about those things. It's like, well, it's a very highly publicized case. The plane has gone missing. These people that owned it are going to want to pay out. Someone's going to have to pay for it. And if it's insured, so what was the verdict? What was the finding due to what? Taken by an abduction by a UFO?
There was so much malicious stuff at the time. I mean, Frederick's girlfriend went through sheer hell too. They sort of had her in on some counter-espionage plot. There was a whole thing about, the theft of the plane with the father. There were drug deliveries. It was just absurd. I mean, how much crap can one family in mourning and shock cope with? And this is because the story was international, wasn't it? It was just Well, did you ever diagnose completely where some of this vitriolic, caustic character assassination may have been coming from? Was there any particular sources that you could find?
There were a few. And
can we name names?
I wouldn't really want to name names, although people can work out. One of the leading skeptic of the day, the most well-renowned skeptic. An American one.
Yeah, Phil
Is he dead now? Phil Klass.
I'll say PK.
Phil,
we'll name the name. We were cancelled a long time ago. We've got no fear of that.
No.
But, we've dealt with people that have dealt personally with Philip Klass. And the way he dealt with the honesty of someone like Travis Walton was disgusting.
Yeah.
Right. And I can remember Travis Walton.
He was vicious. He was a vicious, vindictive man.
And Travis Walton's best friend actually live on what was that anchor in the US? Larry King. I can remember him, screaming at Phil. He goes, Phil, just let us have a look at your tax return, shall we? Because I bet you're getting some money out of counterintelligence there. But you don't edit for Aviation Week and Space Technology, which declassifies into the public domain. You don't edit that without having some allegiance to the internal machinations of the military. You can't do it. It's impossible.
Yep. Well, Klass actually suggested that Guido and Frederick decided they plotted together to steal the aircraft.
Oh,
that was
atrocious.
One theory. Okay.
Right.
So
now Frederick has to go into hiding for the rest of his life. Right.
Oh well, that's obviously what he's doing. We don't know where he is,
and has to change his whole, his name and who he is, his identity,
with his dad,
and start living. No, Guido stayed.
Oh right,
Guido,
I see.
right?
Yeah.
But but Frederick had to go into hiding. Frederick had to get a new identity. For how much was the plane worth? I mean, seriously.
And the 12 crawfish, remember that?
No, they never picked them up.
Oh,
Anyway.
right. Okay.
That
is
the other
frightening.
thing.
That's
The other
just
thing was that
ridiculous.
there's obviously some kind of a drug trade going between King Island and the Victorian mainland.
Sure.
Maybe they're
yeah.
putting LSD in the cheese or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
You're kidding me.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
No, so
You're
it must have been
kidding me.
drug running and drug dealing. And the funny thing about that is that Fred didn't even drink alcohol. He didn't like it. He didn't like things like wine or beer. He just didn't like them. He didn't drink.
You know what
He
drug
wasn't a
dealers do?
drinker.
They do the quickest, most effective action. They're not going to travel the devil's meridian. They're not going to travel
And
the
they're not going to be
roughest,
waiting
most
for their
frightening
girlfriend
freaking
and be
seas.
late, you know.
And this is just absolutely despicable. And
Exactly, it is, yeah.
and
yeah,
it still goes
absolutely.
on today. The trouble with our digital culture is those memes get repeated on
Yes.
and on again. And
Yep,
you know,
yep.
here is an incredible, loving family that you'd understand too. Do you know when that family had migrated out here? Had they been here for a while? Was they second, third generation, or were they first generation migrants, Dad?
Were they Serbian or do you know what
No,
nationality
Italian.
they were? Oh, they're Italian, are they?
Yeah.
Italian.
Okay.
They were, and I don't know whether Guido and Alberta met in Australia. I'm not sure, but they, Fred was their first child,
right,
born in '58. I'm not sure when they came out here. All I know is that they integrated very well into Australian society. They were also enthusiastic members of the Italian community, and
as they should be.
And Fred, Guido actually worked for General Motors at the South Melbourne plant at a place called Fisherman's Bend in South Melbourne. There was a General Motors assembly plant, and he worked there in the design department.
Wow, that's no small job. That's big
stuff.
You
know, the VN Commodore was partly designed by Guido. He was one of the designers of the VN Commodore. Now, the funny thing was, I was working for my father-in-law at that time when Guido was working at GM. And this is a few years after Fred had disappeared, and I'd just become involved with the UFO Research Society. And I didn't have a copy of this photograph, which is the the cover of the book, that one.
It's an amazing photo. Let me put up a big, clear picture of it there. Yeah.
Well, that's bigger, but it's not very sharp. But it doesn't matter.
Sharp, okay.
No.
Let's go with your one. Let's go with your
this one. You can see that's the grain of the film. You can see there.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
And that's where you get that blue speckling as well, which is not an emulsion effect. That's actually happening in real time.
In the grain of the film. Yeah.
Yeah.
That blue sparkling. I've had UFO reports. People have told me that they've seen a flying disc go past, and the air around one side of it is full of little blue sparkly bits, which just got their attention. And it seems to be there in this photograph.
And were you able to deduce that from an aeronautic perspective, or is it ionization? I mean, can we come to any assumption or extrapolation on that?
That photo.
That's
we don't know. This.
All right.
Roy Manifold.
This is Roy took 6 shots.
Right.
That's the 6th shot that day?
Yeah. Well, the 5th, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Roy Manifold was on holiday down at Cape Otway and with his family. And they were staying in, there were some huts that you could camp in along the top of the cliffs kind of thing down at Cape Otway. And he had his family down there, and he was
taking photos.
He was just taking photographs of the setting sun. And he wasn't even looking through the camera as he took the photos, because he was looking at his watch. He was timing the sweeping hand on his watch to get 30-second intervals. He had 6 or 7 more shots on the film, and he wound them all off one after the other. So he didn't even hear or see anything. It wasn't until about a month later that they got the film developed that he found this strange object in the photo.
And in terms of Frederick's flight path, what time was this?
Well, this was this photo was taken about 15 or 20 minutes before Fred reached Cape Otway.
Right.
Right. So it's in the same area on the same day within an hour of Fred being in the area. Well, within half an hour of him being there.
Now, the assumption is the reason why I put the bigger one up that's not as clear, and I can't get my cursor onto this, but if you look directly underneath, you can see a circular ring where it appears to have come out of the water and all of a sudden set up the standing wave with a wake into that water. Now, I believe the shot prior to this.
Oh, that there.
No. See underneath it directly?
Yeah, right.
Can you see that?
Yeah, right.
I'm sorry, people at home are not seeing my wife and I pointing at that. But the shot directly before that actually shows something like that, doesn't it, George?
Well, it actually shows like a wave splashing against a rock, like water shooting up out of the air into the air from a rock. But there's no other waves. There were no waves around.
Yeah, it's calm.
So
it's flat as.
That's pretty unusual. Yeah. Anyway, Roy took the photos, and he thought that the place that he got his wife to go and get the film developed for their holiday photos, and he thought these amateur film developers have mucked up my photo. They got this weird object on there, and he went back to them to sort of make a complaint about the quality of their work, and they said, no, that's just what's on your film. There was nothing wrong with our developing or your printing or anything. That's just what you've got. And he couldn't work out what it was. And then he thought about it, and then he realized where they were when they were on holiday. When he took the photo was the same day that Fred disappeared. But this is, a month later.
Yeah.
That he backtracked and worked it out. He didn't have a date stamp on the film or anything. But he had the negatives. Now the negatives have since gone missing, which is also.
How did that happen? Where? How?
I talk about that in the book.
Well, okay. And we all need to purchase the book, people.
The book.
Yeah. Yes, please.
It's up on Amazon. You can get it in Kindle form or get it in hard copy. I have not got a copy yet. I'm going to buy several hard copies. And as soon as I'm in your area, I'm going to get you to sign every single one.
Oh, absolutely. I'll do that for you. No worries. Yeah, that one.
So Amazon, I think it sells for reasonable, like $30 with shipping and everything.
So George, how long after seeing the plane and then hearing the reports of it going missing, did you put together that it was the same plane that you'd witnessed?
Well, what happened to me was the next day, I'd actually, at the time Fred went missing, I was painting a poster, a bit of a fan of the Doors, and I had a bootleg record. I didn't like the cover, so I decided to make a painting to be the cover of the record album, making my own posters. And I was doing that the afternoon that I was waiting for this friend of mine to come over, and who never I don't think she ever showed up, but that was when Fred went past. And the next day I was still working on the painting, and I had the radio going, and I heard several radio reports saying a plane has gone missing over Cape Otway. There's a search at over Bass Strait. This plane has gone missing yesterday evening. And I thought, oh, wow, that might have been the one that I saw go past, And the first thing that popped into my mind was, keep an eye on that plane. It was weird. I mean, you can figure it out now that it was when I saw the plane go past, the one I saw, I could be mistaken. It might not have been Fred. But the plane I saw go past was on the same direct path that Fred took about 2 or 3 minutes after he'd left Moorabbin. That's the distance I was from Moorabbin Airport.
Right.
So it just added up that it must have been him. And he's gone down and never been seen again. So the radio reports just said that a plane is believed to have run out of fuel and crashed into Bass Strait, so they're searching for it. And so there was a search that went on for about 6 days, and they never found anything. They found some oil on the water, an oil slick, and they got a sample of that. That was marine diesel.
Right.
So as far as I know, you can't fly a Cessna with marine diesel. They don't run very well.
And years later, they said they'd picked up a piece off one of the internal. Where was that? On some island area?
An air intake cowling from a Cessna, which had not the same but similar part number matching, but not a matching serial number. The parts do have serial numbers stamped on them.
And those cowlings come off quite easy, don't they? Those cowlings come off all the time.
Apparently they do. Apparently if we knew how kind of unsafe those aircraft are, you wouldn't go outside without a helmet, you know.
But
these parts can just drop off planes. You know,
this is the part of the ridiculous stupidity that goes on to this day. Now, you know, we called out Phil Class. Well, my wife and I did. You didn't. You're fine. I'm going to call out Wikipedia, because when you actually go up, who in the hell is the controller behind the curtain there?
A whole bunch of people.
Because when you look at Frederick Valentich's case, these are the things that come instantly up when you start to read about this. That it looks like he did go down into the sea, that there was evidence found to support that claim. Who is writing that stuff 45 years later?
Oh, yeah.
And why?
I don't know. Look, the thing is that that part that they found was nowhere near King Island. Right? It was 300 kilometres from King Island. It was at Flinders Island.
And how long after?
5 years later.
Oh, my God.
At Flinders Island, they found an aircraft cowling that matched the same type that might have been on Fred's plane, but the numbers didn't match.
Oh, right. Well, it wasn't.
For it to have been part of Fred's plane, it had to travel under the Bass Strait by itself, 300 kilometres against the current.
Right.
Right. And end up on the beach a couple of 100 metres from the runway, the airstrip at that island.
It's like an episode of The Littlest Hobo. It's like really the saddest cowling in the world that made the greatest choice to misdirect itself. How ridiculous and absurd. What is going on? Why is there so much demonization on that Wikipedia page?
Yeah, it's just the way they are. In fact, a friend of mine who was very frustrated with Wikipedia, he wrote a book about that skull that they found that they thought was an alien skull. They called it the Star Child skull.
Yes. Yep.
Lloyd Pye was his name. He passed away a few years ago.
Yep.
I was in contact with him a fair bit, and I've read a couple of his books. And he referred to Wikipedia as Wackipedia, because if they get some facts put down published by them, if the facts are incorrect, that doesn't seem to matter. They won't let you correct previous errors. He could not get wrong information corrected because they wouldn't allow it to be changed. It's supposed to be a forum that if new information comes along, you can update it and fix it.
Absolutely.
But no, he could not. They refused. One of the early tests done on that skull was done the wrong way or something, and they got the wrong result, and that became the actual answer. And he couldn't get them to change it. They wouldn't change it. The lab did something incorrect. They've made some muck up with the DNA or something.
Well,
the
all
DNA
those years
sequencing
ago
wasn't
too.
right.
I mean, DNA has advanced so much in just the last few years. You know, in the last 2 or 3 years, that you know,
that's
any results back then may be
and no one could be
superfluous.
more transparent than Lloyd Pye during his life. That guy was taking that skull everywhere and showing it to everyone. You know? And, you know, I was trained medically initially. I trained as a nurse. Show me that front parietal suture. You know, there's big problems here that anatomically state we're dealing with something else. And you know what? This is not rocket science. This is not aeronautical science. This is common bloody sense.
Well, the thing that struck me about that skull was interwoven within layers of the bone. Was like a wire, a metallic mesh, which acted as a Faraday cage to protect the brain during space travel.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, that's just a normal.
I didn't know
a
that.
normal human anomaly, isn't it? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We've all got
Another
one of those.
mutation. Yeah. I've
Just a
always been
mutation.
living with my Faraday cage. Now,
Yeah.
getting back to Frederick, and I love that digression there. There was another eyewitness that came up with an astounding story. It's a remarkable story, and I love the fact that you've actually was so affixed with this story that you actually did some model work that's become an astounding photograph in your book. But this picks the story up, and it was through a great researcher, Bill Chalker. So maybe let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, that was something that didn't come up till years later. In the early 90s, Bill Chalker was compelled to go and do a research project. He took a friend with him, and they wanted to interview many UFO witnesses because there'd been a big flap of UFO stuff going on around Coonabarabran in central New South Wales. And he wanted to go and speak to as many witnesses as he could. And many of them told their stories of what was going on over there at the time. And a lot of them said, you should go and talk to Laurie, go and speak to Laurie. And they said, well, who's Laurie? And they said, he runs the hardware store in Coonabarabran. And he talks to every customer. Every customer that comes in, he takes note. He asks them about if they've ever seen a UFO, and he writes reports down if the answer is yes. He's got a lot of documents. He's documented a lot of UFO sightings from around that area and surrounding towns and things as well. So they went and they caught up with this bloke, Laurie, and they caught up with Laurie, and they got him to tell his story. And he said he had hundreds of UFO sightings, interesting ones. He said, but the most interesting one of the lot was came from a farmer who'd come into his shop one day. This farmer had moved up to Coonabarabran, but he'd come from Adelaide somewhere. And he said that years before, he'd been bailing lucerne one Sunday morning, and just happened to be the very morning after the evening that Fred disappeared. So the object, this thing, the farmer was working. He had a tractor, and he had a baler behind it, a hay baler, and he was collecting this lucerne, and he was struck by this very unusual sound, a screeching noise. He thought he had a stripped bearing or something in the equipment, and he uncoupled it from the tractor because it was powered by the tractor's engine. He uncoupled it, but the noise didn't stop, and it didn't make any sense to him because he's just uncoupled it. And he's jumped off the tractor and gone to look at the equipment, and then he sensed that he was in a shadow. It was a sunny day, but he was in shadow, and he looked up, and up above him was a big circular disc just hovering above him, only like a tree height sort of thing, not that high up, but he didn't want to stay under it because, like a lot of pilots, a lot of farmers do their own crop dusting. That's not the word that Laurie used. He said crop spreading, but crop dusting was what he was talking about. A lot of them fly and do their own crop dusting, and they know from their aviation experience that you've got to have a certain airspeed or you fall out of the sky. This thing wasn't moving fast enough for its size to even remain aloft. He thought it was going to crash down on him, so he ran to the side to get out from under the edge of it so that if it does come down, he's not going to be under it. And from that perspective, he's looked back and seen that it had a dome on top. He said it looked like it had looked like a church door in the dome, what looked like a black seal around the base of the dome. And he said, and then the strangest thing was, as it came around, as it was sort of turning, he could see there was an airplane stuck to the outside of it, the whole aircraft stuck to the side. And just at that point, Bill Chalker's cassette ran out, and he had to turn over to the other side. So I joined it back together. The one you hear online, you hear Laurie telling the story. I edited it back together, but I can't get all the squeaky noises out of the tape. It was a Must have been a really cheap tape because it's got a horrible squeaky noise. But we've got the main thing. We've got the recording of this guy telling the story. But the trouble with it is a secondhand story. I had to include it in the book because it's come along through a very reliable source from Bill Chalker. And we've got the guy talking about it, saying that this farmer came in and told him this story. But we don't know the name of the guy. I've tried and tried to investigate. You can't begin an investigation when you don't have a name to go on.
Of course not. And you've gone to an incredible extent. You've done a lot of cold calling.
So did the hardware guy not get a name off the? Doesn't know who.
Well, he had the name, but he wasn't going to. He must have. Look, I can only assume the farmer said, "I'll tell you this incredible thing that happened to me, but don't use my name."
Okay.
Now, that farmer did another astounding thing. He actually wrote down the number of that Cessna. He could see it. Is that right?
He scratched it into his tractor with a nail so he wouldn't forget the number. And the guy telling the story, Laurie, had forgotten what the registration number was when he was talking to Bill when it was being recorded. He said, "But I've got it written down at the shop somewhere.
Yeah, right.
When I'll get back, I'll tell you. I'll contact you and I'll tell you what it was." It was the same number. It was VHDSJ.
So he did tell Bill that number. He got back to his shop and wow. Well,
and he said something else too. He said a couple of other things that checked out as well. He said not only that the number checked out, but he said that when the thing flew off with the plane still attached, it went over where the military maneuvers were happening. There's a military base down that way. Somewhere near Murray Bridge, there's an army base. And he'd seen it fly over there. Now, that was the last time he saw it. And a friend of mine who's also another UFO researcher, John Ockertell, he's got a lot of contacts with the army. He's got a lot of background with an army. He knows a lot of guys in the army. He got them to check the date, and there was definitely an army exercise going on that day in that area at that base. So that checked out. So we only got that through Laurie Ryder telling that that's what the farmer said. And the other thing that the farmer said, there was that, and there was also there was two different things that Laurie said that checked out exactly. So one was that the thing flew over the army base while there was army exercises going on, and that was true. And I've sidetracked myself now. There was another thing that checked out.
Don't worry too much, because what you're stating here already is what you take into court and use as evidence. And, it sounds like it was getting...
Is it all in the book, George?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. You've got to buy the book. Yeah.
Gone into a fair bit of detail.
Spoilers away. This sketch that you sent us, the McCool sketch, can you tell us something about that? This is an astounding sketch.
Well, look at the shape of that thing. It's like the bottom half of the object in the manifold photo.
Right.
The object looks the same. It's also the same shape described by Travis Walton as the thing that dropped him off and flew away. In his book, there's a very like an underneath looking up view of that.
Right.
Now this was done by Diane McCool, who was the witness who she sent this to me, and there her notes around. She's an artist. She said she scribbled it out and redrew it several times to get the shape right, because it was an unusual thing with a dome on the bottom and then a row of lights as an unusual shaped object. And it is so similar to what's on the front on the manifold photo. Although the manifold photo has like a slightly different shape.
It's at the top, isn't it?
That object is slightly different. But if you just look at, say, the bottom half of it there, that's nearly the same thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
The shape of the bottom half, it's like a dome on the bottom, like it would tip over if it landed on the ground.
I'll show you this as well. Do you know about this? This is an image that was supposedly leaked out of NASA from a low orbit. You know, that's the manifold photo. But next to it is a photo of, what's something that has been called endlessly as our satellite in low Earth orbit out there. So who knows?
Well, I've never seen that before.
Yeah,
that's new to me.
Yeah, this was an incredible point. You would have come across this bit of ridiculous debunking.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, there's your answer. See, there's the answer. It's just a
giant
B stuck on the negative.
It's a giant B.
And
like
it's stuck on the
giant.
negative. It's right on the negative. And it's got its laser gun with it because it's making those blue sparks.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sorry
From
to
the
even
laser gun.
show that, but it just shows you
That's
the
great.
absolute absurdity.
The
Is that from
extent
the
that
Australian
some people
Skeptics,
go
is it?
to.
Is it from the Australian Skeptics? Is it?
Or the
knows?
rationalists or any of those people. Look, as far as I'm concerned, they never institute Maslow's hierarchy of values. Those people need to put priority on there if they're going to save us from our own ignorance and inability to navigate the world rationally. They should be racing down to Cole's New World and standing there at the counter as people make the most ludicrous decisions on their diet and their health.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at organized religion, the skeptics. But anyway, don't get us started on that one.
No.
Sorry about that. We digress badly.
So you're gonna go to
It's okay. So where we were at was that this thing was seen over Adelaide by the farmer. And that's what he said. He saw it disappear. He heard the funny noise coming from it. And it checked out. So it'd be really good to be able to find out who it was and to be able to speak to the farmer. I'd love to be able to,
of course,
maybe find the tractor and get a photograph with the scratch on it, with the registration number
brilliant.
Scratched into it. Look, it may not exist anymore. It was a long time ago, but
can you show us out of your book that little photo that you put together, the model work that you did? I know that's bit of a spoiler again, but I think this is great. You should have an artistic career in diorama work. Really, it's beautiful.
I went down to the local park to take a photograph of
you did this brilliantly
to get the right background. Well, I had a camera tripod with a model. It was a piece of Tupperware, actually, with an airplane stuck to the side. I've got the model of the plane here. There it is. There's the photo. So
let's have a look at this. This is really going to blow you away, I suppose. Check that out.
That's just to give people an idea
incredible
of how it may have looked to the farmer.
How
to see
big?
This circular disc with this plane stuck to the side of it.
How big did he? How big did he estimate this object must have been? Massive.
Must have been.
Well, he said it was about 90 feet across, so 30 meters.
Right.
Sort of thing. 90 feet. Mm-hmm. He said, going by the size of the tractor and the equipment towed behind it, the harvester.
Right.
He thought it must have been about 90 feet across, and it was making this funny sound. And he thought it wasn't going fast enough to stay airborne, so he ran to the side.
So it was almost hovering, or was it? But it was.
Oh, it was hovering above him. Yeah, he also said that there was.
Right.
Yeah. He also said that there was.
That's one of your beautiful daughters.
One of my kids. That's Alex. Yeah.
Get Alex to step into screen. We know. I think family is an astounding thing. She's not going to do it. She's not going to do it.
I don't think so. No.
Right.
Anyway, so look, the thing is that there were military exercises happening the day the thing happened. This is the next day. Now, the other thing was there was another bit that Laurie talked about, which I didn't do much about in the book. He said that Laurie went and the farmer went and did some shopping that afternoon. I sort of did a speculative one chapter. There was a bit of speculation to try to sort of look into and examine what must have happened to that farmer who saw that object. That must have been quite a freaky thing, to experience, to see a plane stuck on that thing and it flew away. What would you think? Are there people in the plane? Are they okay?
Yeah.
Where's it gone? Has it been
going
reported
on?
Missing? What
was
the heck
that?
is going on? Is it the end of the world? I don't know what is going on. It could have been for Fred. We just don't know. And you'd think he would have reported it to the police. I went to the police, the Adelaide police, and the police archives people, and got nowhere. Nobody had ever reported a flying object with an airplane stuck on the side of it. Nobody had ever heard those words. But the funny thing was, I wrote about this because I was writing columns for the Ufologist magazine back around the time I heard about this story. It was about 10 years ago when I first heard about this story. And I published that in the magazine. And I got a lot of flack from some people saying, what a ridiculous story. That's stupid. That's ridiculous. And it was such an unusual account that Bill Chalker thought it was a bit ridiculous to even mention it to people, but he did. Great credit to Bill. He contacted me when he knew I was, I'd been in a documentary about the Valentich case, which was the Science Channel documentary. And in the end of that, that's the one where Dr. Haynes puts the cassette in the machine and presses play, and you hear that metallic sound from the end of the Valentich tape. So he actually released that, and that's the first time that was ever heard. That was the actual sound from the tape of something, some rattling metallic sound. I think it's the prop going, because that plane's in the air. He's just said he's at 4,500 feet, and that he's going at 2324. That's 2,300. That's the manifold pressure's a negative 2,300 inches per second or whatever it is, and the engine's running at 2,400 RPM. Right. So it's running flat, normal cruise power, and it's come into contact with this thing in the air, and the motor is still going. And from what the farmer described the next morning, it was stuck to the side, possibly magnetically or something, we don't know. He said there were no chains or ropes or anything visible, and there was oil running down. Well, there would be, because if the prop's been cutting into the side of this object, it would have damaged the prop. Now, it only ran, that metallic noise finished after about 17 seconds, which is also consistent with, had Fred been inverted, he would have run out of fuel.
Right.
One of the first things mentioned by the government Department of Air at the time, one of the spokesmen said he probably got disorientated and was upside down, and so ran out of fuel and then went into the sea. So if we spoke to a lot of aviation people, and one of them was Steve Roby, he said this very clearly: if you fly a Cessna, it has a dihedral design in the wing. The dihedral means that the body hangs just slightly below the wings. So it cruises, and it's a training plane. It's for people to learn to fly. It's a very forgiving aircraft. And if you do accidentally go to fly it upside down, it will just come back up to normal again, because it's the way it's designed. It's designed. If you see birds flying along, they have their wings up and they just sort of cruise with their wings up and the body just a bit below. Looking at the wings, you can't see it, but it's built into the design. What Steve said was that it'll actually fight against you if you try to fly it upside down, the Cessna. It will fight you all the way. It wants to self-correct. But also, if you forcibly maintained an inverted position, you will run out of fuel. Within about 20 seconds, you'll run out of fuel. But Fred was talking for 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes. It couldn't have been upside down.
No, there's no injection system. And you'd also be hanging from the friggin' ceiling.
Well, you're hanging by your seatbelt. That's something that Arthur shot.
Well, you'd pretty quickly realise that you are hanging upside down, because all the blood is rushing to your head.
It does happen to pilots. They do lose orientation.
Sure.
Pilots. We think that might have happened to JFK Jr., when he crashed that plane, because he could, the weather conditions were so bad he couldn't tell which way was up, and he went into the sea. That's one of the
What was
theories.
our country's singer that died, our American country singer?
John Denver?
Yes.
John Denver.
There was something there similar happened.
Uh-huh.
But listen, you've spoken about that sound sounding like, and this is a sound I'm very familiar with, an industrial sewing machine, because my wife won't stop creating, and left, right, and center. She's knitting, crocheting, and she's getting the industrial machines here in the next couple of weeks. But that, again, sounds exactly what you assessed it to be. That would be a sound similar to that happening with that prop.
It's a funny sound. It's only coming through Fred's radio, nobody else's. There's all these other people communicating with Steve, and they've got clear radios. And the plane was checked out that morning.
Right.
The radio would have been checked as well. Everything was okay. But whenever Fred, on that tape, whenever Fred is talking, there's this noise coming from the background. Something's interfering with the radio, but you can hear Fred clearly, but you do hear this noise in the background. There was a fella who heard this happening live as it happened. His name was Eric Ristrom. He used to be the head of the Australian Taxpayers Association.
Right.
I contacted him about his own UFO sighting, and that's also in the book. And he was telling me about how he'd had a UFO sighting from his house in Baldwin, and he estimated the object he saw must have been about a kilometre in diameter. This huge object. And it was reported from all over Melbourne by people that saw it and reported it to the police because it was massive. But a couple of days later in the paper, the authorities must have been very worried about that one, because a couple of days later they said that it was just an unusual weather phenomenon. It's so unusual we don't even have a name for it. That was
so unusual,
published.
never experienced it before.
That was published. So I rang Eric back and I said, what do you think about this latest explanation for what you described? And he said, that's a load of, what did he say? He said, that's a load of bull.
Yeah. It's a load
That's
of
what he said. It's a load of bull. And he said to me, and he said, by the way, do you know anything about the Valentich case? I said, yeah, I know a little bit about the Valentich case. And in fact, the missing pilot's father comes to our meetings sometimes. He's still looking for answers. Yeah. And I've got to know Guido very well, because he was often coming to the UFO meetings, the Victorian UFO Research Society, because I joined.
And you were the head of that, weren't you, at some stage?
No. I was never the head of UFOs. I ended up leaving them because I didn't like the way they did things. They didn't want anything to do with anybody else outside of Victoria.
Let's not start on this path, because we have just been burned in the last couple of years. And, it seems to be a thing, how competitive, how ridiculous, how isolating. And if we're going to fight amongst ourselves, then we're never going to resolve any of this.
No.
Well, Alex, who was just here before, you just saw Alex in the room, was just a baby. When I went off, I'd seen a video I wanted to buy and it wasn't available anymore. I should have got it when I saw it. I didn't. I had to go further afield, and I took Alex with me in a pram, and I went in. This is how I know how long ago it was. And I went into this place, and there was a magazine that almost leapt off the shelf at me. It was called the Australian Ufology magazine.
Right.
Really? So I grabbed that and I took it home and I looked at it, and it had who was the publisher and who was involved. I contacted them, and that was Robert Froller in Queensland.
Yes, that's right.
He was the publisher of this magazine. And I said, would you like to have a correspondent for Victoria to talk about Victorian cases? Yeah, we don't have anyone. Yeah, that'd be great. So I started writing the column for the Ufology magazine.
I'd say I would have read many of your columns.
Right.
We have many copies of that publication.
Yeah. Well, so that got me, doing that regularly, being a writer, just writing those columns. And I had some other thought in my mind I wanted to share with you, but that was relevant, and now it's gone.
I should stop interrupting you.
It'll come back to me. Don't worry. But
I get very overexcited, and I'm sorry about that. I apologize.
It's not your fault. No,
I'm 64.
But I in one of my columns, I wrote about this farmer that saw this thing hovering above him, and there was an aircraft stuck to the side of this object. That rung a bell with some of the parents of one of the regular readers of my article. Right. And he contacted me via email to say, look, my parents can remember seeing something on TV where somebody went on TV and said that he was an American official of some kind that was out here, and he was with his wife, and he demanded an armed escort to get in and out of Channel 9. He wanted to go from his hotel to Channel 9 safely, and he demanded an armed escort to do that because he had some groundbreaking information about the Valentich case, and he thought the Australians had a right to know about it. And then he wanted an armed escort to get back to the airport, get on the plane with his wife, and get out of Australia. That was how important it was for us to know. And then what he said was that Frederick Valentich had no connection with the UFO at all. It was a surveillance drone run by the American government from Pine Gap right? And it was a big. They had little ones and big ones. They were electromagnetically controlled. They were remote controlled. They could go anywhere and do surveillance. And they said, and one day the big one came back with an airplane stuck to the side of it. And they said, but the pilot was okay. He was alive. He's now part of our top secret program. He's not allowed to contact the rest of the world. This was said on the Don Lane show.
And
I can't get it.
We've got no footage of that tape. Well, we must track that down. We're very good at finding lost archive material, but that is an absurd story.
And guess who it was telling the story? I didn't know who it was. And I contacted the archives, Channel 9, and said, look, there was a guy who demanded an armed escort in and out of the studio to tell this story. That didn't help. I had to know who it was or the date that it went to air, and I didn't know either, so they couldn't help me. But they were very helpful at that stage. Later, I found out through Facebook, I found out one of my Facebook connections had actually once been one of the producers of the Don Lane show.
Right.
And she wasn't there when this happened, but one of her friends was another producer who was there when it happened, who told her who it was. It was none other than Gordon Liddy.
Gee, Gordon.
Right? The guy who broke, one of the guys who broke into the Watergate Hotel.
Yeah. And who ended up running around with Timothy Leary after he spent time in jail for that Watergate. Can you believe that? And he was one of Leary's arresting officers. But they teamed up for entertainment purposes.
Why would Gordon Liddy come to Australia to tell us
so weird
that there was no UFO involved in the Valentich case? We don't have anything to worry about. We're not being invaded by aliens. It was just an American drone that accidentally collided with Fred's plane.
How big?
So there's nothing to worry about.
Do you remember Gordon Novel from that time as well? Novel was evidently photographed in Dealey Plaza. Novel was one of the people that was enforced to keep J. Edgar Hoover down a little bit and would show J. Edgar Hoover photos that they held in the Central Intelligence Agency of him and Clyde Tolson, the deputy director.
His secretary.
In fellatio, delecto, or whatever they call it.
Or whatever,
Anyway, I don't know the Latin term completely. Do you realize just prior to his death, he started to come out with these incredible stories about alien technology held by the government as well? So it's so odd. And I actually got to spend a very short time on the phone with the deputy director of the CIA in the 70s, Victor Marchetti, who signed the Pine Gap Treaty out here. He created the one peppercorn rental each year. They used to come out and give a glass jar with a peppercorn in. It just shows you what caring, empathetic people they were. And he was very drunk and very angry that I got his home personal number. At the end of the conversation, I said, well, you've gone on the record prior to this, so will you tell me in this phone call tonight, is there any truth to the suppression of classified material pertaining to UFOs and possible extraterrestrial hypothesis? He said, yeah, there is, so fuck off. And that was the end of the phone call. So out of the horse's mouth there, you just never know. But how astounding is that it was Gordon Novel? And it just shows you, Gordon Liddy, the games that people play when it comes to intelligence. And they play them directly with our media. And you and I were discussing about Stan Deo, one of those people that appeared and made a huge presence on the scene. And he was supposedly subliminally encoded in NORAD, wasn't he?
Look, I don't know. The thing was, just quickly, Gordon Liddy, once I found out who it was, I got back to the Channel 9 archives and I said, have you got a copy of the Don Lane show when Gordon Liddy was on? No, Gordon Liddy was never on the Don Lane show. I've got people telling me that they remember seeing him on it. And the Channel 9 archives.
And what he said. And
Oh, do you know what they said? They not only said Gordon Liddy was never on Don Lane show, they also said, who are you and why do you want to know?
Oh.
Well, isn't that interesting? Now,
I've never had that response from anyone before.
Yeah. And who are these people working in the archive? Are they actually working for the television archive?
Look, why do they want to know who I am?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they should already know that. But
yeah, they probably do.
I mean, the background research for Westall 66, and you've done a lot of research around Westall as well, and maybe possibly, hopefully, that might be the next book we get out of you. But you know, I remember that moment we had the director get in touch with us, who's a good friend of yours, and ask about the Channel 9 archives in comparison to that film footage that had evidently been shot. Evidently, the can was there, but the footage has never seen the light of day. Yeah. And that event was suppressed rather rapidly.
Oh, God, yeah.
You know, I had a same moment at my school in Artarmon here in Sydney. Literally, you know, in the 60s, where we had adjacent to us 2 big sports grounds. And during lunchtime, all of us had climbed on the wooden picket fence to overlook the sports ground because there was evidently, we were told, there was a hovering weather balloon.
Right.
That was just sitting there about 100 feet, maybe 100 meters. It's a long time ago. Just stationary for the entire lunch break.
They do that. And did it suddenly disappear as well?
Well, we didn't. We were all called back into class, and this thing was still there. And that actually kicked me off. And see, this is the trouble with these moments, this crack in consensus reality. You know, it changes your life deeply. And, you know, I'd say that farmer is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder because this should not be there. We are led to believe that this is not possible. Now, I don't need an explanation. I don't need a hypothesis. I just need to know that I'm not losing my mental stability. But what event's going to stick with you so profoundly over the course of your life? It's not going to happen from a nightmare.
No.
Well,
or a dream or a fantasy.
We looked at that sketch earlier, that black and white sketch of that object. I said it was the same shape as that thing. The lady who did that, who contacted me about that sketch, she described what she was going through. I rang her up and she gave me a report of it, and I asked her to send me a copy of the sketch, and she did put all those details around. She went through that post-sighting stress disorder that you're talking about. She had that affected her deeply. She'd been a pretty skeptical non-believer until she saw that. She spent the rest of the weekend, she just didn't even want to go to bed. She wanted to stay up all night looking for it. And that was in Wantirna where that happened. The funny thing was, our hotline got a report within 24 hours of her sighting. She contacted us. Within 24 hours, in another area, not only about 15, 20 Ks from her, it made an appearance 24 hours later, and another report came in. And if we could have told her that, she would have gone there, to see it in this other location, which wasn't very far away. Would have taken her 10 minutes to get there by car, and she might have had a chance to see it again because it came back. It was still in the same general area around Mount Dandenong. Within a 24-hour period, it was still hanging around and still being reported.
And I've spoken about this before. Nothing happens in isolation. You know, when it comes to these events, it seems to be, because this is the difficulty in being able to report these things. Now, 1978 was a massive year. You'd remember this story by television journalists filming on a plane twice, Quentin Fogarty. And this was an incredible incident that occurred in New Zealand around that same time of, well, a little later into the year, I think it was. And it was the South Island. So, and not only that, I think in Bolivia in 1978, they had a UFO crash there that is seen as the most credible case with over 1,000 eyewitnesses. So, I mean, nothing happens in isolation. Things are occurring around these events all the time. Very similar things worldwide.
Yeah.
So, George, if you hadn't have seen this, if you hadn't have, if the Valentich case hadn't have happened, what would you have grown up to be? What would you be? What would your hobby have been if it hadn't been this?
I'd probably be well, I ended up being a camera repair technician, so
Okay. Yep.
I probably would have been doing more of that.
That was your day job, was it?
Yeah, I was
Yep.
doing camera repairs as a full-time job, or computer repairs, or audio equipment. All electronic stuff I like working on. I still do. I still do repairs on things, but anything like
So
CD
before that,
players,
had you ever
amplifiers.
considered, like, that this whole, UFOs, flying saucers, anything like that before this case? Had that
Had I?
been in your, like, considered this stuff? Were you open to it or
Well, yeah,
not?
because when I was at school, the first book I ever read was that Richard Tambling book, Flying Saucers, Where Do They Come From?
Right.
And he set up a scenario in that book where he said, if you go outside and look at the sky long enough, you'll see one.
Right.
And if you keep doing it, you'll see them. So it was already part of my personality. Although it would come and go over the years. Every now and then there'd be an interesting case on the news or in the papers, and then you'd keep an eye out, and then you'd either see something or you wouldn't. But like I went, I had a friend who really wanted to do some stargazing for some reason, and we were looking at the sky from his backyard in the early 70s, and I saw something. There's just stars everywhere, and I was just looking at two stars. I just happened to be looking at these two stars that looked like they were the same brightness and just not very far apart from each other. But we do know that's from our perspective. The stars are all kind of light years apart from each other.
Yeah.
I saw something that started at one of those stars and traveled across and stopped at the other one. Like it was a blinking light that went on and off and on and off and on and off and stopped. That started at one star and stopped at the other. They weren't far apart, but these were stars I was looking at. I wasn't looking at something in orbit. Well, I wasn't watching a satellite go over. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. And I said, you know what? And I was saying to my friend Russell, I was saying, can you see that? Can you see that? It's moving. Can you see that? And by the time there were so many stars, by the time Russell was looking in the same spot, it was over. The movement had stopped. And so I just couldn't. If you had a torch and you had it blinking on and off, regularly on, off, on, off, on, off, and you moved it across your field of view, I saw that from a long distance.
Yeah.
And what occurred to me was, have I just seen something that started at one star and traveled and stopped at the other star? It must have been traveling at the speed of light to be able to do that.
Remarkable.
And I thought, wow, I've witnessed some object traveling at the speed of light from one star to another and stopping. I'd never even heard of that happening to anyone before. And I was trying to get my head around it. So I rang up the planetarium people and I said, I want to talk to an astronomer. And I got onto somebody there who was like in charge of the planetarium, who ran the thing, an actual astronomer. And I described what I just described to you, what I'd seen. And they said, no, that's impossible. No, you didn't see that. You didn't see what you saw because it's impossible.
But you knew what you saw.
I'm telling you what I saw, but yeah.
That's how satisfying that was.
Okay,
Couldn't possibly be true, therefore it's not.
Isn't that remarkable? Look, I'm just going to quickly run through some images because we're coming towards the end here. This is a reasonable book of Richard Dolan's that people should look at in terms of those multiple pilot sightings and things like that. And here's a film, Richard Haynes, sorry. I love Richard Dolan's and I'm slipping up there. Do you remember this film, This Island Earth? Now, this had an incredible moment where a saucer actually picked up a light aircraft and picked it up in a green beam. 1955.
Wow.
Yeah, yes.
And then there's this case that went to the UN. Kurt Waldheim was there at that stage, which is the same thing that Frederick was talking about. Another green light went inside. I mean, this was 3 military pilots. Their craft was actually lifted up. They had no control of the helicopter.
Yeah. Paul Norman used to go on about that case a lot, actually.
Yeah.
He saw a connection between that and the Valentich case, which I haven't been able to see. But Paul,
well, again,
Paul was convinced it could have been
that green light. Yeah. And Now, you were telling us about Truth Magazine, weren't you, at one stage? I remember hearing that in a podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that story? And let me just get up my favourite cover of Truth, which was our Attorney General dying on the job, Billy Seddon. Do you remember that? He was actually caught sleeping with his son's girlfriend, and I think during the encounter had a heart attack and she'd fled.
What are we looking at here?
Yeah, that's just...
Look at all those stories.
I know. Unbelievable. Anyway, let me get that off.
Tennis girls' lesbian terror. What the hell is going on?
But tell us about the connection with Truth Magazine.
Well, what I found was I was looking at all the newspapers to try to find out who had any information about... I was looking for the Westall case, and there was nothing. And that was interesting because this wasn't connected to the Valentich case at all. I thought there must have been something in the papers. And what I did find in the Truth was interesting. They had a number of UFO stories sent into them a week or two before the Westall case back in 1966.
Right.
And they actually ran a newspaper article. The front page of their paper said, "Hey, if you've seen a UFO, contact us. We want to run a story about it. We'll interview you. We'll do a story about it." They had a real interest in the thing. They sent their own photographer out to Mount Dandenong because there was something flying around over there, and he got a photo, and it was the front page newspaper article. It was a week before Westall happened. And then I looked at the next papers and the next papers and the next papers, and it was nothing about Westall until about 5 years later. There was just a little mention of it. It had been completely covered up to such a degree that these people that were enthusiastic to receive UFO stories got nothing. Otherwise, they would have printed it. But the local paper, the Dandenong Journal, got some reporter down there before the roadblocks were put up.
Wow.
And he actually got some of the story, and that was published. So the Dandenong Journal did report on it for a couple of weeks. That was just a local paper, not one of the mainstream newspapers.
That's why in our day, things were really important, like the UFO news clipping service, because it's those regional papers that will tell you the truth of what's going on. As it reaches out further, those stories become incredibly suppressed. That's fascinating research. And I mean, you need to be rewarded for the amount of extraordinary work you've done. Now, I slipped onto something looking for some material this morning. How about this? Do you know anything about this story? A Cessna hitting something in the sky and no one knows what it was. Completely destroyed the plane.
When was that?
Well, I can't even find it.
2002?
Yes, 2002.
Right.
But I can't find anything more. I'm going to look more into this piece of information. I just slipped across looking for imagery. But it does remind me, again, that none of these stories actually disappear or go away. So I'm going to play you a little piece of news here. It's only 1 minute and 18 seconds, but it does, to me, relate a bit to the Valentich story. And again, this is our best trained eyewitnesses in the world.
We just had something go right over the top of us that, I hate to say this, looked like a long cylindrical object.
That was the pilot of American Airlines Flight 2292 after witnessing a mysterious object pass right by his aircraft.
It almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast.
The close encounter happened early Sunday afternoon while the American Airlines flight was passing over New Mexico en route to Arizona.
Have any targets up here? We just had something go right over the top of us.
The radio call was noticed by an airline radio enthusiast who says the call caught his attention because the pilot sounded very excited. On Tuesday, American Airlines validated the call but asked for questions to go to the FBI. The Federal Aviation Administration also acknowledges the pilot reported seeing an object, but says its air traffic controllers did not see any object in the area on their radar scopes. It's not the first time a pilot has spotted unexplained flying phenomena, and while authorities may never be able to explain what this one is, it's definitely an experience this pilot won't forget.
We just had something go right over the top of us that, I hate to say this, looked like a long cylindrical object.
Charmaine Samani, Global.
Interesting there. No radar return. You know, you've got, and they actually confirmed the sighting, but said, don't consult us. Please check with the FBI. I'm not sure if Gordon Liddy is still alive or working in tandem with them.
And John Lane's
but
no
you know,
longer working.
it's not what happened to Frederick. It's not happened in isolation. And if there was a culture where this wasn't ridiculed and suppressed so much, this might be something that we hear about literally on a daily basis.
Well, I think it is changing. I think the tide is changing as far as the ridicule goes. I think people are getting less dismissive of it since the David Fravor came forward and spoke about the Tic Tac thing, you know, and since the Pentagon admit that these things are real and that they do encounter them quite often when they go up in the air. So,
I mean, we'd had our first congressional hearings since the Condon report. You know, that's been many, many decades. And it's astounding what was. But the trouble is now, you know, I really feel that it's a bit like the Truman Show. All of a sudden, you go, this is real. It's an actuality. But what's on the next channel? That's nice. But
What's the next
thing we're watching? Or they're selling it to us as this threat. You know, it's a bit like how the construction industry has thrived during COVID. It's like this information can't come out without some manipulation, especially from the military-industrial complex. So let's scare the hell out of the people again, sell it as a threat, and get more money towards defense spending. How do you feel about those ideas?
Yeah, it's really hard to say whether these things are a threat or not, you know. And I mean, Fred,
don't you think we're the greatest threat? We're the greatest threat. Look what it's like trying to survive those UFO groups. I mean, is it a threat that we are so fragile? The moment you walk out the door, your life is threatened. But you know,
well,
the way we're burning oil, we need to stop burning oil. That's what we need to do.
The way we are illegally smuggling sand in international waters for the construction industry, we need to stop. We need to stop with microplastics. We need to actually respect and look at all life from the egalitarian perspective you have.
I will push the button. I'll do it. And we can leave this planet alone.
Could people please turn off their diesels? Don't let them idle. Just please turn them off.
Yeah.
I don't care.
You know, we had a guy here who's from the power company checking out the power pole outside our house. He was there for over half an hour, fiddling around doing stuff, checking the post and doing various things. He wasn't traveling anywhere during that time, but his engine was running the whole time.
Why?
It's a diesel, and the company pays for the fuel. I don't have to worry about that. They don't turn it off. Wow. Half an hour later, he was down the street checking the next pole down. Engine was still idling, just running.
Frightening.
I don't know. There's a disconnect. People have to stop burning oil. We've got to stop burning oil, please.
We need to actually pay attention to our Indigenous culture. And we blew it at the start here again.
No, I didn't. I was thinking about it, but I wasn't going to. Well, I wasn't going to interrupt.
We should tell our international and national audience that we are on stolen land, and this is part of the Gadigal Nation, the Eora Nation. Eora Nation, part of the Gadigal people. But my heart is in it, and I think that we could learn so much from that profound culture. And one day, and that's why I'm no longer on SBS, because I never get the pronunciation right, George, never. And so they're out to shoot me. I just appreciate your generosity and your candor and the extraordinary work that you've done relentlessly keeping this story alive, out of respect primarily for the family and the trauma that they've suffered.
And writing some of the horrible things that some people have said about it, you know. Frederick was just going down for a flight, whether he was getting his hours up or he was going to go and pick up a few crayfish. It doesn't really matter. He was going to go down there, come back and, you know, and then get on with his life. But it didn't happen, unfortunately.
Huge potential, great family.
Yeah.
And this is what occurred. And we could have all learned something extraordinary from that experience. And, you know, what do? We attack each other.
Okay.
So
And
where
on that
can
note,
well, no. Where can people get this book?
Well, it's very hard to get publishers to even look at a manuscript. So, but if you upload your file, when you've written it, if you upload your file to Amazon, it becomes available to people instantly all around the world. They just go there and there it is.
Easy
and
done.
that's why Amazon, a lot of people have an aversion to it. They don't like Amazon. It's the elephant in the room. They have problems with it. For me, it's the greatest tool available to people. I don't have to buy a printing press and print my own books.
Sure.
I don't have to. All I had to do was upload the file, and the next day it was available. It's crazy. I had the book edited. I had it written by a very, very smart, intelligent editor who went through I did a quick printout on my computer and got it all penciled, all the little corrections and errors and things. And there was one thing that I was told probably wasn't really relevant to the story, so I didn't put it in there. But I can tell you about it.
Please.
It's to do with Guido.
Because that you won't get in the book.
And it's to do, it wasn't in the book because the editor said, oh, look, it's not really relevant. But I wanted a copy of this photo. I didn't have one, but I was in contact with Guido because he used to go to the UFO meetings. And I rang Guido up. I said, look, I don't have a copy of Roy Manifold's photo. Have you got a copy of it? And he said, yes, I do. I said, could I come and photograph your picture of it? Because they had no other way of getting a photo. I had a film camera with a macro lens, so I could get a pretty good quality copy of Guido's photo. He said, yeah, sure. So he worked at GMH at the time in the design department. Well, this is what I was talking about earlier. What I did was I worked for my father-in-law in the motor industry, and I often went to the GMH place to do work for GMH. They would have a new prototype car they were making, which was the VN Commodore. They got the earlier Commodore, cut it down the middle, made it this much wider, and just welded strips of metal to make it wider. That was the first prototype of the new wider Commodore. And Guido was part of the design team. And they had a windscreen made for it, and they'd cracked it or broken it. And I was in the game of repairing windscreens. And this is the only one of its shape and size in the world because the car was a prototype. And I had to go and repair that windscreen. And I was going there to do that the next day. But during their lunch break, I got Guido to come out and bring out the manifold photo so I could get a copy of it.
Right.
Wow.
And we met in the staff car park. He came out and he had the photo. We knew each other because he used to come to the meetings. He had the photo. He put it down on the bonnet of the car. I got out my camera with the built-in macro. I was just leaning over to get a photo, and I heard a little noise, and I looked up, and we both looked up. We were surrounded by security guards. Because he was from the design department. He brought something out, and I was taking a picture of it.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. But
wow.
Then they said, what are you guys doing? And we showed them this photograph, and it was just a photograph of the setting sun. And they said, oh, is that all? Okay, bye. And they walked off. They left us alone.
So they thought that
really
Guido was passing on secret plans. Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's a great story. And, I've heard you articulate before that, if this was optioned, your book, it wouldn't be a long film. I think it would be a great film. And it'd be a great film like Tracy Torme's Fire in the Sky about Travis's case, because this is a human story. It's about a family being impacted. It's about, a love life being impacted. It's about, all of a sudden in this reality we assume to be three-dimensional, major questions arising that could actually change the way we are with each other. So I think stick to that option. You just get approached by the right people, and this story should be optioned and made into a film, at least. But I know that you are appearing in Close Encounters Down Under, and I'm excited that the production team from EQ Media got you involved in that series, because your work is really vital and been a very important part of Australian ufology in the history. And I think over the course of time, people will begin to realize that this is a case that's never going to go away.
No.
And was incredibly instrumental in making us realize there's something else going on in our reality beyond just our own machinations.
Well, I used to have a retired scientist living next door. He was a retired teacher and he was a scientist. And he used to come along to UFO meetings with me because he liked to encounter a lot of the meetings attracted a lot of unusual and strange people with strange ideas.
People.
And he thought this was amazing. He used to come along just for the end meeting when everybody was chatting and he'd get to meet all these strange people. But he was very skeptical about all the UFO stuff. He said there was only one case that he said he could not figure it out what had happened in that case. He said, and that's the Valentich case. It's the only one that had him. He couldn't find a prosaic answer for it, or a rational reason for what happened to Freddie. He just couldn't work it out.
You know what, George?
The only one.
You only need one case.
And that's it.
You only need one case. You don't need 100 or 1,000.
And you know what? When those manifold photographs were analysed by optical physicists, I think Bruce Maccabee was one through Ground Source Watch there out of was that Phoenix?
Bill Spalding.
Yes, and who actually weighed in there at the end was the incredible writer and a person that was a part of the Centre for UFO Studies, Jerome Clark, who actually is an arch skeptic and someone that will tear apart stuff till we've got the science down. And he said there is no disputing that photograph. Yeah. And it appears to be releasing some form of vapor around it at the same time. And I can remember standing with Jerry Clark. When was that? About
91.
91 at the first international conference
UFO
we had in Australia.
Yep.
And he turned to my wife and I as we were filming and said, "Who in the hell are you people? You are filming everyone." And I said, "Look, our background has been in social work, and we're just as enchanted by eccentric individuals as we are by the real phenomena."
Yeah.
And I don't think that we should delineate. No. It's all fascinating. Yeah. And that's what it's all about. Well, I want to say thank you from the bottom of our heart. Please keep in touch. If you ever need us, and one screaming cat will be there for you instantly. And we will push that book out there to everyone we know. I'm purchasing copies at the end of this week. So thank you so much for your extraordinary work, your time, and your candor. You have been on Untold Radio. This is Down South Anomalies. And at some stage in the future, we'd love to get you back as a guest yet again.
It was my pleasure.
Yes. All right, nice George, thank you so much. We will...
just before you go, can you pick that camera up and show us that picture that you had drawn? I love that picture at the back of the Citron UFO incident that was sketched for you. Yes. Do you mind doing that?
By a very well-known Australian artist named Konrad Kondratovich. All right.
That's a great-looking room you're in.
Konrad Kondratovich. So I've got a bit of a reflection from the...
That's all right. That's great. Look at that.
Wow.
So you're a lover of the early Citron. And so he's actually...
I used to have one of those DS. He made that look like a DS flying. With somebody being picked up in the light beam.
That is just brilliant.
Yeah.
Amazing.
He borrowed the view of the guy with his hand up looking at it. I've seen that's somebody's other work. He borrowed that and changed it. But there you go.
It's gorgeous.
It's fabulous.
And have the wife and the kids always been open to this subject matter as well?
Not much interest from them at all.
Really?
They don't seem to have much interest in it at all. No.
There you go.
All right. No. Well, we'll be having a firm word with them in the future and getting out the strap. All right. Anyway. We love you dearly. Our hearts with you. Much respect to you.
All right, George.
Well, thank you.
You will be going up on
Saturday at
on
midday.
Saturday at midday if you want to tune in onto YouTube.
Or if you fly to the States, it'll be 8 p.m. on Friday there.
Yeah.
Well, okay, cool. Very good.
Right.
I'm not going to the States, but there you
go. No,
thank you.
Definitely not. All right.
Please
thank you
keep
so
in touch.
much.
We love and respect you. All the best.
We'll be back next week with another fascinating guest and program.
Yeah, but they don't get better than this one, really.
No, that's true. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.